Times are rough in the world, our money has been rapidly losing its value, and on top of that, AI has been taking the digital art scene by storm. Which isn't good news for artists doing commissions such as myself last month. Now, I needed assistance paying rent again, so I thought opening commissions for a month would do the trick, especially since the last commissions video I uploaded was my most popular upload in a while. And this time, to increase my chances of getting clients, I even rolled back the controversial ban on furries. Not controversial actually, but long story short, I did get clients, or actually client. Just a single one, and it was a furry, but with a catch. It's not like full on. Say what you will about the character design, but I'm just glad that there was somebody out there to support the channel while I get my job situation sorted out. So here's what they asked for.
Norse themed.
A big open space, overgrown ruins. A very dramatic setting to get a feel of the fighting either a dragon or a Jormungandr. The weapon of choice would be a big axe. Feel free to add battle wounds if needed. Also a perspective showing just how big the creature is would be preferred. To start this one off, I first attempted to run the background through Midjourney to get the work done for me. But something that bothers me about Midjourney though is that it's still hard to get proper camera angles. I scrapped the initial background that I generated, but I did borrow some ideas from it for later. Namely these yellow plants and the greenery on the ground. Something else I tried to generate was ideas for the dragon itself. Thought it might work for realism if I tried to blend it with a T-Rex, but I didn't get anything back that I liked at the time. Looking back at it now though, a few weeks later, I actually do think that this second option here, it looks kind of nice with like the rhino-like horn. But yeah, it's too late now, unfortunately. So I kicked off the drawing process with the first draft. I wanted to not waste much time constructing the pose, so I used a reference from a Graphic Studio pack to start it out. However, I quickly realized that this pose is not going to work for what I had in mind. I wanted a more extreme perspective and like a very specific pose that it's kind of hard to find reference for. So I threw it in the bin and started the second draft. To achieve this more extreme pose, I used a 3D dummy in Clip Studio Paint. So the first pose I created wasn't really working, and at that point I remembered to start the on-screen timer. But yeah, a problem I find with this 3D dummy workflow is that when you pose it and set it up to fit a specific camera angle, the actual realism or like the physical possibility of the pose may suffer, you know what I mean? And yeah, that's exactly what happened for me here. I wasn't satisfied with how the pose felt, but didn't know exactly what was off about it. I'll be getting back to this in a bit, but first let's set up the other elements of the scene. For the foundation of the ruins in the background, I threw in some simple cubes. And for the dragon, I found this cool 3D head base in the Clip Studio Asset library. So I went for a pretty simple rule of thirds type composition, just placing the main elements of the scene that way. But yeah, now on to the actual drawing portion. I'm not too experienced with drawing creatures, so it looks a bit awkward probably. Especially since there are multiple factors present making it more difficult. First one being that I tried making it interact with the background, trying to make it like climb on the ruins while it was in this kind of extreme perspective. Not so much for the dragon, but still though, had to take into account the perspective while I wasn't even sure of the design I was going for. Like I hadn't made like a concept sketch beforehand, so I was just designing the dragon as I went. But yeah, once I switched back to drawing the character, the unnaturalness of the pose started hitting me hard. Maybe I should reset the pose to something different altogether. She's kind of far away from the dragon, but already starting to swing the axe. But then again, fighting a dragon alone, like a massive dragon with a small axe, doesn't make much sense either. So does it really matter? Is the question. Would it be worth the extra time to change the pose? With all these thoughts clouding my head, I just ended up changing one leg to go higher as if she's running or charging towards the dragon, which looked pretty awkward. Not that good of an idea, but I just ignored it for a bit and drew out some more elements of the scene instead, but then still ended up changing it back to how it was. On the next day, I noticed that the palms of the hands were both facing the same direction, which was something I missed when setting up the dummy. But after fixing it, more stuff looked problematic to me, like the straightness level of the front leg, which I tried messing around with, but it was unnecessary. Wasn't actually an issue. Anyways, I just ended up taking some action shots of myself. So yeah, this is starting to be a common practice in my videos at this point. The biggest change it helped me make was just the positioning of the arms. But yeah, the pose looked more or less fine now, so back to the dragon. So something that stuck out to me was how the wings looked. Some of the references I had collected had the wings attached to the front limbs, which I thought was a cooler look than having them be separately on the back. It was harder to figure out the logic behind how they actually attach to the front limbs, you know. But yeah, I just did some random stuff and it kind of worked, so I just stuck with it. Now I wanted there to be some trees and greenery in the scene as well, but sketching a bunch of trees out with lines would have been a waste of time. So I used the trees and overgrown plants on the walls as a segue to the painting stage. But at this point, the timer was close to halfway done, so it was time to add in some very rough shading and showcase what the composition will look like to the client. The only addition they requested was some more greenery and plants in the scene, which I would add later in the painting stage. Now, I thought I would use my old process on this piece, which is creating everything in black and white first and coloring later. It has been a long while since I last used this method in a serious project. Building up the dragon with paint instead of lines proved to be a little bit of a challenge for me since, as I mentioned, this is a bit out of my comfort zone as of late. Doing this requires good discipline with making big shapes of color first and smaller shapes on top of them later. And yeah, I suspect the reason why I've moved away from this method is because I prefer to be able to just jump around between bigger and smaller details when I want to, which is a lot more easy when working with lines. The clock was ticking very fast and I had to adapt as best I could. I was too far in at this point for restarting to be an option, so I just had to trust the process and keep going. I did some airbrushing here as a change of pace to paint in some occlusion shadows and stopped the session for the day here. Next day I just continued with the overall rendering. I had left some notes for myself at 3 AM while looking at the progress shot on my phone, and now it was time to implement these notes. The biggest change I left myself a note for was changing the dragon's head shape a bit, mostly the fins at the back of the head. I thought he could use a dental makeover as well, but I didn't feel like drawing the teeth right away, so I left him looking like an old toothless man for a little bit while I rendered the girl's face. But yeah, then I ended his suffering and gave him his teeth back. Finally, with only a bit over an hour remaining on the clock, I decided it was time to start adding in color, repeating the same mistakes as last time. But to be fair, I did add an extra hour to this commission tier at the same price as before, so not that big of an issue maybe. I'm just justifying my failure to track the time properly. Anyways, for the ruins, I did some minor photo bashing so I wouldn't have to manually draw any textures. But yeah, I was tired and called it a day here. On the next day, I started rendering on top of everything on normal mode and tried making it look presentable to show the progress to the client. I was really rushing through everything at this point, doing more photo bashing and just constantly jumping around all over the canvas to just get as much done as possible before the timer runs out. But yeah, now the clock hit 0, rest in peace. To be fair, I do think I actually got a good amount of work done for 6 hours, but still though, it didn't look complete enough. So I decided to give myself an hour and a half of extra time with no additional cost to the client. The main bulk of the work was done, so I could just focus some more on fun details at this point and just trying to make it look more like an illustration rather than a concept art piece. However, there was one major thing still missing, and that was the greenery of the scene, which the client also requested. So I filled up the background with some custom brushes as a starting point and then photobashed some more layers on top of it. I took a bunch of screenshots of a video of somebody walking through a forest to acquire these photo elements. I did a little bit of manual painting on top of these elements to blend them in with the rest. I got a kind of a satisfactory result with this method, and that was close to being done. I didn't plan on doing 4 hours excess like last time, so I just rendered out the key elements of the image a bit more, like the character's face and outfit, and of course the axe, which I had completely forgotten about up until this point. I hadn't touched it even once after the sketching phase. And the final change before the clock ran out was the color of the dragon's wings. I gave it like a red hue to imply it being thin, kind of like a subsurface scattering effect going on here. It looks pretty cool. So yeah, I thought I was done and closed the program with a feeling of relief, but then 3 a.m. hit again, and I opened the finished artwork on my phone, and it just looked like complete dog shit to me. I was so disappointed. I felt like the image wasn't working at all, and I did not want to deliver this to the client yet. So I thought that, hey, I do a fair bit of roasting of other people's work on this channel, so perhaps it's time for me to be the one that gets roasted. To get some feedback, I headed over to the Greenhouse Discord server, which is Astri Lochnes Patreon server. I submitted the piece to a critique channel and went to sleep. The next day I woke up to 2 different paintovers done by 2 members, which was a pleasant surprise. I didn't expect to get multiple paintovers. So yeah, it was pointed out that the dragon should have like a longer neck, which allows it to bend downwards for a more predatory looking pose, like it's defending the ruins or something. I was suggested to add more glow to the dragon's mouth as it's been breathing fire recently, which was something I did attempt to do earlier, but was way too modest with it and it wasn't really reading. Next thing that was pointed out was the character's pose. Like, it doesn't make much sense to just stand there that far away from the dragon, which is what I had already thought about before, but just decided to ignore it. Lastly, it was suggested to expand the canvas sideways as it felt a little bit cramped. So I did that. I actually did not think about that myself for some reason. And yeah, it helped the composition breathe a bit more, which was a good thing. I thought about changing the character's head angle as well, but it just looked like shit and I decided to just not do that after all. Looking back at this, I give this picture a rating of 6 out of 10. There's so much that could be improved here. I do like how the colors and the perspective turned out, but otherwise, not enough planning on my part beforehand. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? Leave your ratings in the comments below.
Buy my shirts right now, or else.
Bruh, check out my SoundCloud.
Hey kid, wanna buy some reference packs? I got you covered, fam.